So, I think we can all agree. Star Rail has a lot of characters who are designed very well. They range wildly in how good they are, but there is a clear design philosophy with just about every character who comes out. Herta was meant to be a follow-up character. Rappa is meant to be a break character. And Arlen is meant to be shit. However, rules are meant to be broken. And whether it be the actual character designers or overly curious fans, some characters break out of the mold they were initially set in. This is how we land on hybrid characters. Characters who either combine two design styles into something new, or characters who are capable of playing a different style than they were initially made for. Today, I want to talk about Lingsha, the IPC characters who are the classic hybrid characters, Xueyi, and the confusing case of Welt and Himeko, who have both found partial new life in the game in wildly different ways. You ready? Let's begin. Hey, if you haven't, subscribe. Yeah! Alright, so this is actually being added in because it's something a lot of people wanted me to touch on in the Building Every Teams video, so we're gonna finally get to it today. We have to talk about Lingsha, and the pure insanity she is capable of. I mean this with no exaggeration. This is a healer capable of being your primary DPS. Not only is she capable, but she is incredible at it. And no, it still doesn't make sense. Lingsha is a Fire Abundance character, who is actually an Erudition DPS wearing a really convincing disguise. She does everything you would want of a healer. She keeps your party HP high, cleanses debuffs, and even has an ultimate that increases break damage taken by a good amount. So what makes her special then? Well, she has a follow-up attack. I know this may not seem like much since Aventurine did it first, and realistically they work similarly. Aventurine will continue to stack shields when he hits his follow-up, and Lingsha will heal with hers. They both serve the same purpose, but just work a bit differently. What makes Lingsha unique is just how powerful her follow-up attack makes her in the break meta. We'll touch on Aventurine later, but quite simply, he is not capable of doing what Lingsha can in regards to damage. That is thanks partially to how good Super Break is, but also how well Lingsha's kit is designed to do damage. With the inclusion of Fugue in the game, players running Lingsha break teams have actually gone up, and things work well with her at the helm. She is more capable of dealing with a vast amount of enemies than someone like Boothill or maybe even Firefly, only being beaten out truly by the true Erudition DPS that is Rappa. While obviously Lingsha is still more wanted as a healer, running her with Firefly and Fugue can make her your perfect sub-DPS without having to sacrifice the slot. This is all without mentioning that because of her follow-up strength, people also run her as a crit DPS to be paired with Fei Xiao. She will always generate stacks for Fei Xiao and will still ensure the team stays healthy at all times. I think many of the characters in this video are a bit more interesting to discuss, but this really is a prime example of players creating something entirely new out of an existing character. We'll talk more about how players created hybrid characters soon, but now I want to touch on characters who I feel were designed to be hybrids. Characters meant to be unique and break the mold of their paths. I'm of course talking about none other than the IPC. When looking at the IPC characters, all three of them don't follow their traditional archetypes. With Jade essentially being the main influence for Topaz and Aventurine for a lot of their lives, it makes sense that they would end up adopting part of who she is into them. At least, that's how I like to think about it lore-wise, to validate the absolute bullshit that these two are capable of. Let's start with the first of the IPC trio to be released, Topaz. Topaz was a Fire Hunt character who was released in version 1.4. Wow, that's a little after I started playing, and man, that was over a year and a half ago at this point. Jesus. Anyway, Hunt characters looked a lot different than they look nowadays. The Hunt characters at this point in time were characters like Dan Heng, Zila, Yanqing, and Su Shang, who noticeably all suck. Hunt characters are probably the characters who have aged the worst in this game so far. They were built for single target combat exclusively, which means they struggled as Star Rail added more enemies into most battles, and made enemies who were harder to kill or had more resistances. So what makes Topaz different, I hear you asking? Well, in reality, she's actually a single target attacker herself. What deviates her from the norm is the existence of her follow-up attack. As we see today, this is the staple for Hunt characters now, and Topaz mostly served as the blueprint for it. Yanqing technically has a follow-up attack, but that move is so trash, I really don't even want to talk about it. Topaz mixed the style of a traditional DPS who relied on crit rate and crit damage with that of erudition characters. Obviously, there was characters like Blade and Clara who had follow-up attacks as well, but the consistency with which it happened was far more similar to that of an erudition at the time. Numbi is on a constant timer that can be advanced by attacking with Topaz. This would be similar to Himeko and Xueyi, or even Jingyuan, since his Lightning Lord was also on a timer. He just couldn't advance it, the poor old man. Saying Topaz was the innovator of follow-up attacks is definitely wrong, and I know that, but this is when it felt like Star Rail started to truly understand how they're supposed to work, and how to implement them instead of just using a counter character like Clara. Himeko being tied to break, and Herta being tied to HP are fine I suppose, but can still be inefficient. This way of having Topaz and her allies constantly deal damage as follow-ups to trigger even more follow-ups? This just makes so much more sense, and as we can all see, it works wonders in terms of actual gameplay. The hybrid style Topaz contributed to is probably the best one in Star Rail, considering just how many hunt characters are now follow-up units instead of just one-on-one damage dealers. The main exception nowadays is Boothill, who is a break DPS, which that in itself is completely different from the original Hunt characters as well. All I can say is, good job Topaz, you really helped set Hunt straight. Next up is Aventurine, and I will be making this one a bit quicker since I've already had to talk about him so much for other videos. Much like Topaz, Aventurine also learned the art of follow-up attacks from Jade. He was the first sustain to have a good follow-up attack while also being an incredible defender. There was other sustains beforehand who were definitely meant to enhance your offense, but Aventurine simply brings this to a completely different level. With his follow-up attack and high crit rate, he is perfectly capable of outputting additional damage for your team. This also comes alongside his ultimate, which places a debuff on an enemy, increasing crit damage taken for multiple turns. Quite simply, he is an offensive-minded sustain character who is also still incredible at sustaining. We can already see this type of hybrid continuing onward with the next sustain we had, Lingsha, who I already talked about. While Star Rail was probably already planning to shift their thinking on these characters, that doesn't change the fact Aventurine was the first premium character to feature this new style, while also excelling at it. I've already made a whole video about sustains and what their role has become, but I will say it again. This new style of healer is more than welcome in my opinion. It's unique, allows for more fun strategy in teams, and really, since it's already suggested you get a good sustain, might as well get something even better out of it. With the two apprentices out of the way now, let's move on to the woman who taught them, Jade. And realistically, she's actually the least hybrid out of these units. She's an erudition DPS who, shockingly, had a focus on follow-up attacks. This is the normal formula for these types of characters, so you might be asking, what makes Jade unique? Well, her skill is what deviates her from the normal follow-up. She's essentially a hybrid harmony character? Let me explain. Jade has a skill that instead of attacking, places a buff on a teammate. In exchange for a small donation of HP, the so-called deck collector gains an increase to their overall damage. This also contributes to Jade's stacks for her follow-up, with every time the deck collector attacks, Jade will gain stacks for her follow-up. Sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? Obviously, March works a bit different, but surely you can see the resemblance. With follow-up characters having become so much more popular and constant, Star Rail has found a lot of ways to keep the archetype unique, and this is something that works extremely well. The effect of a skill being placed can consistently change based on the character and path, which means I can see this design style sticking around for a long time without getting stale. With the IPC out of the way, I want to talk about how much I enjoy what they deliberately did with this group of characters. The IPC specifically being this strange set of characters who didn't really adhere to traditional standards of their path is a really cool concept, especially with the reveal of Jade being erudition, which was the main follow-up path for so long. Again, I absolutely love it lore-wise, and with Jade also being a hybrid character herself, it maintains the trend perfectly. Regardless of how you feel about the IPC characters, I really hope everyone can agree this is a really neat concept that I hope can continue on for specifically IPC characters if nothing else. So now that we have the IPC gang knocked out, we can move on to Star Rail's most interesting experiment. A character who was so ahead of their time that the support just wasn't there for them. With a very cool aesthetic and a sharp weapon to boot, let's finally talk about Xueyi! Yeah! Okay, real quick. Blade was a big experiment for Star Rail, and he was actually a hybrid character in his own sense, but with how poorly the concept around him was designed and how it's getting to be expanded on, Blade will definitely end up getting talked about on a different list. For a far worse reason. Xueyi, on the other hand, while still peculiar, is this strange preamble in my mind to another character everyone ended up loving, Boothill. Xueyi is a destruction character who focuses on being a crit DPS. Wait, no. Actually, she focuses on being a break DPS and her damage even scales off of it. Actually, wait, what? Wait, no, she's both? Yep, she's both apparently. Xueyi was built as a true hybrid. You want as much break effect as possible with her, but remember, this was before any form of super break existed. So that means she was working exclusively with traditional break teams featuring characters like Bronya and Pela. Star Rail decided since the meta for break wasn't that developed yet, Xueyi would have a trace that would make her attack scale off of her break effect. This meant building her for crit damage was still ideal, while stacking as much break effect as possible since that would make up for her lacking attack. The ideal Xueyi style would be to break the enemy to get all that extra damage. Keep in mind as well, Quantum Break is extremely strong. And then Xueyi could continue the relentless assault with her high crit damage output. Xueyi's design is truly something insane, honestly, when examining it closer, because even with everything I just mentioned, did you know she's also a follow-up unit? Yes, Xueyi can collect stacks of karma, and when she has enough, she will fire off a follow-up that will do about 270% of her attack. She gains these stacks every time enemy toughness is reduced, a concept that definitely deviates from some of the other follow-up conditions in the game even now, much less back in the early days. She not only has a more consistent follow-up than whatever the hell Blade is working with, a focus on break, which was very uncommon at this point, all while still needing the conventional stats of a crit DPS. Xueyi is the most melting pot character in this entire game, and it's not even close, my lord. This, folks, is the true definition of a hybrid. Now, if only it worked. Xueyi, while an incredibly fun unit on paper, has some deficiencies naturally. First of all, she's a 4-star, which means the power level is just naturally lower than other characters. Second, by giving her so much, it also makes her incredibly difficult to build around. Having a high crit stat and a high break stat is far from easy, and you'll probably need to rely on other characters like a Ron Mei to get you the max break effect stat Xueyi needs, which is about 240%. Her follow-up is the part of the kit you need to worry about the least since it will just happen while achieving her break effect. But this is also not the best thing to build around since her break is going to make up most of her damage combined with this follow-up attack. Not to mention that with the exceeding amount of break-related characters in the game currently, using Xueyi for that break damage is just smarter. Xueyi is a case of Star Rail wanting to experiment and finding some fun concepts through her, but not quite hitting it out of the park on the first try. Her investment is astronomically high for a return that will still ultimately be worse than a good Firefly. She still brings a lot of uniqueness to the table and highlights the amazing combinations that Star Rail hybrid units have and are capable of. If you have an E6 Xueyi lying around, I would highly recommend trying her out at some point. My old roommate loved her, and I myself have used her in Divergent Universe, and it's been pretty fun. Also, she's meant to pair pretty well with Fugue, so if that sounds fun to you, then knock yourself out. We'll now move on to a character who I have a bit less to talk about rather than the absolute confusion that is Himeko, the other leader of the Astral Express, Welt. So, how is Welt a hybrid, you might ask? He seems like a standard Nihility character, and while slow isn't great as a DOT, he can still do respectable damage as a DPS, right? Well, yes, but no. Welt is technically fine as a DPS, and if you want to see a video that can really demonstrate the potential of Welt, Moon has a great video on her channel that I personally liked a lot as a big Welt fan. He's a very unique character, and his skill is capable of pumping out an insane amount of damage alongside his powerful ultimate. Unfortunately, specifically as a Nihility unit, he falls a little flat. Slow is the main thing gained from Welt besides raw damage, and while that can be helpful, yes, think about how DOT works. Without Kafka to detonate them, debuffs don't do their damage until the enemy moves again. For something like Memory of Chaos, or any of the turn-based modes really, slowing them so that they don't get a turn that cycle means you'll lose out on a great deal of damage gained from your other DOT units. It is quite literally the antithesis of what you want to be doing as a Nihility player. In this way, Welt has already defied his expectations since he is legit better as a normal DPS now rather than focusing on effect hit rate and having a bit more lacking crit stats. If we're being technical here, this already makes him into the hybrid DPS role, but now we can talk about the real thing you're here for. Sustain Welt, baby! Woo! God. So remember how Welt's whole thing is slowing enemies? Pretty bad for other DOT, yeah? But great for traditional DPS who don't want enemies to have a turn. He can't heal, yes, but if he slows the enemies to a crawl so your team can absolutely devastate them before they move, does it really matter? Well, this is definitely a strategy that's a lot more talked about than actually used in my experience. There are a lot of people who have still done it, have actively encouraged it, and proven it to be an actual sustainable strategy for people going for 0 cycles or who have very, very high level DPS builds. This is probably the most insane thing I've ever seen, if I'm being honest. Star Rail players turned a dude who was meant to be a DPS, always intended to be a DPS with just a weird gimmick, into a sustain. Incredible. While I wouldn't recommend this for the majority of players, if you feel confident in yourself and your builds and want to try something funky, this is definitely something for you. I appreciate that instead of Star Rail making the hybrid character, it's the players who turned Welt into a hybrid, finding his strength in a spot where the creators just didn't think of, I assume. Now that we have all the IPC out of the way, we have one of the biggest hybrid characters ever, Xueyi, done, and even Welt Sustain wrapped up, as well as Lingsha Super Break, we can talk about our final character of the day. Our last character today is none other than Himeko. Himeko was an erudition character who has been here since the very beginning of the game, and somehow, she has only gotten better over time. In a world where Yanqing is trash, Bailu and Japart are mid, Bronya keeps getting replaced, and Welt is usually okay at best, Himeko has managed to actually see even more play over time. Clara is also good, but this isn't about her. Sorry, Clara. Himeko was initially made as a crit DPS who focused on follow-up attacks. Her follow-up condition was, unfortunately, a bit difficult. She needs enemies to be broken 3 times before her follow-up goes off. Pretty easy by today's standards with all of the Foxy and Prayer, Firefly, Fire Implant, and straight-up toughness reduction that exists, but those only came into existence relatively recently. If enemies just weren't fire weak, you would need your other characters to be able to break their weakness. If they couldn't, Himeko lost out on most of her usefulness. This was a pretty isolated case though. It isn't too hard to break enemy weakness if you pay attention to what you need. Himeko was able to carry on this job for a while just fine, but over time, old characters get weaker and weaker, and Himeko fell out of the limelight. It wasn't until Pure Fiction came out that she finally saw some true relevance again. She is simply incredible in it because of the pure amount of follow-ups her and Herta are capable of when working together. This was still the extent of her usefulness though. You had to be insane to use her in other cases over characters like Ratio, Jingliu, and Acheron. This is where the hybrid part comes in though. Himeko has gone from an okay crit damage DPS to one of the best break characters in the game. The introduction of Super Break suddenly made her kit make so much sense. She was built perfectly for it without the designers even intending on it. You're seeing in the back here Break Himeko absolutely decimate enemies, and it is hilarious. Star Rail also knew how much people were loving it, because guess what? An erudition cone focused specifically on Break was added to the game when Jade came out. Jade does not need Break. No other erudition character needed Break at this point. I feel this was 100% done for players who loved using Break Himeko, and it was wonderful to see Star Rail give players what they wanted to further enhance this new version of their character. Break Himeko is one of the most interesting cases in the game, truthfully. For such an old character to still see relevance in such a unique way is shocking, and especially in a way that I feel wasn't intended for her to begin with. Super Break was obviously made with Firefly and Rappa in mind. Xueyi benefited as well, and now players could try to convert other characters to Break DPS if they wanted. Despite her not being thought of for this at all, Himeko is one of the characters to benefit the most from Super Break and Fugue specifically, finally giving her the ability to break anything on her own. It is wild to see, but after finally doing it myself, Break Himeko is legit, and it is something I feel like everyone should try if they can. It breathes new life into this character, and has finally given me the chance to use her consistently like I've always wanted. Hybrid characters in Star Rail are a strange thing for sure. But in just about every case, they're still really good while balancing the different archetypes that they're based off of. For characters like Welt and Himeko, to see new uses again is awesome. The IPC all being unique combinations is something I hope continues. And Xueyi, yeah, Jesus, that girl is a mess, but she's awesome at least, so hey, you know, points Xueyi. These characters are a good representation of creativity of both the designers and the community, and continue to give me hope that this game will continue to be innovative and fun with their characters for years to come. And really, that's all I can ask for. Thank you everybody so much for watching! Also, I didn't mention Lingsha in that last little bit, but yeah, Lingsha's cool too. I really love Lingsha. This script was a little jumbled, but it was something I was really excited to talk about after making Break Himeko myself, so I wanted to write it as fast as I could so I could get started. Did I get it out in time? Haha, no! This was written in 2.6. Jesus! As always, I am curious to hear your thoughts. Who's your favorite weird experiment from Star Rail, or do you have any characters you've tried and used in a completely different way that ended up working out well? Leave a comment down below with any thoughts. I'm excited to see what you guys have to say like always. With that said, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys for the next video. Bye bye!